Welcome to Legal Beagle.
Hello and welcome to Legal Beagle with Attorney Kristina Lyke, founder of Lyke Law PLLC. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Advocacy in Divorce, Balancing Client Interests with Collaboration. Kristina, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. We're switching gears here. Last episode we did, we talked about a lot about criminal law. Today we're going to talk about some family law stuff, particularly divorce. Can you explain the key differences between contested and uncontested divorces in Michigan, and how often do you see each in your practice?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start off with contested and uncontested divorces. I'd say probably 98% of them are contested divorces. I hate to say that, but that's the truth. Non-contested is basically the parties have agreed, and that is an approach that we use with mediation prior to actually filing the complaint itself in court. So non-contested is the parties are in agreement of making sure that there's a fair and equitable resolution. Contested divorces, you see a lot of those because a lot of times people call and say, I have a non-contested divorce. And it really isn't a non-contested divorce, because you'll start asking them about retirement, about the marital share, who makes more money. Well, there's spousal support consideration there. There's the children. And a lot of times there's a lot of fights regarding the children, which is sad. Then we have to go through that process too as well. So I would say that contested divorces are much more heard of than non-contested divorces. But I will say this, that Michigan law with our courts, they encourage that people come to a resolution and they will abide by them. There's certain exceptions, though, which is the spousal support and the custody of the child. But if you can come up with an agreement between the two parties, they want you to do that, because they look at that as, that's a civil matter between the two of them. So they'll abide by that.
When someone calls and thinks they have an uncontested divorce, do you think is it just because they think that it's like, well, we both want to get divorced, so it's uncontested?
That's true.
Yeah.
What you said. Yes, we both want to get divorced. So what's the deal? Or they'll say it's a short-term marriage. Well, short-term marriages actually sometimes can be the most contested, because you're 2 years in a marriage and all of a sudden you find out the person had an affair and emotions come into it. So those can be very challenging in of itself.
What do you think people really misunderstand about the divorce process in Michigan?
I think they misunderstand a lot of things. First of all, the fair and equitable resolution. Because first of all, Michigan is a no-fault state. And then we talk about fair and equitable resolution. So yes, we always start with the premise that it's a no-fault state. However, when you look at the property factors that we use, and we start with different cases in Michigan, and in those property factors, we have what is called prior bad acts. So it goes to fault. And what happens is that, it could be you're a drug addict, you're an alcoholic, there might be some extramarital affairs, things of that nature. That comes into play. And so that helps with the property resolution. So, and fair and equitable does not mean 50-50. A lot of people think they have this misconception that it's 50-50. It means fair and equitable. And there's a whole procedure we could go through, like a whole time period that we could go through fair and equitable resolution. And if you would like to have me come back, I'd be more than happy to do that. But that would take probably a couple hours to go through the case law and things of that nature.
Sounds like we've got some future episodes planned.
Absolutely. I think another misconception too is that the children, a lot of people think that if you have a 1 week on and 1 week off equal parenting time, they think that, oh, I don't have to pay any child support. No, that's not the case at all, because child support goes by the number of overnights that you have with a child. And it also goes by the net income that you make, that you earn. So it doesn't go by the gross, it goes by the net income. So if one spouse makes $300,000 and the other spouse makes $40,000, you can bet that they're going to be paying some child support.
Are there other unique laws that impact the divorce process, like when it comes to asset division or alimony? Although we don't call it alimony now, it's spousal support or
we call it spousal support. Some people
That's right.
still call it alimony.
Okay.
It depends on, I would say past attorneys would always call it alimony. It's supposed to really be called spousal support, because spousal support is, we have what is called temporary spousal support, rehabilitation spousal support. We also have permanent spousal support. And permanent spousal support is usually when you have like a long term marriage that the person might have been the one that took care of the children all the time. And that's any mom who has taking care of children, they should have actually made $1 million a year anyway, because being a mom is very difficult work. I'm very thankful for the parents I have, but looking at who is the breadwinner, who is the person who stays home with the children, did they sacrifice to go and do that? So did they not be able to go to school? Did they not be able to get their bachelor's degree? And then there's factors of the spousal support factors that we find in Sparks v. Sparks in the case law.
What strategies do you employ to effectively advocate for your client's interests, but also encouraging a collaborative approach to divorce? Because I feel like there's got to be a balancing act there for you.
There is a balancing act, because some people will come in, I want a zealous attorney. Now, I am a zealous attorney. I have lots of nicknames out there, and some of them I think are kind of cute, but probably my mom wouldn't think so. But anywho, my point is this: is that it is a struggle, because I want to explain to them this. First of all, I go through, when anytime an individual comes in to see me, I talk about the divorce process from beginning to the end. And obviously, again, I cannot go and tell them what's going to happen, because it's against our ethics anyway. But I will give them a step-by-step process. But I'll explain to them this: the more contentious a divorce is, the more money you're going to pay. And I think that as attorneys, we should always, inform these individuals that. And then there's some people that they don't care. They want this done. It is because of the fact is they knew that she took the money or he took the money. It was wrong. And they want to make sure that that gets taken care of. And then there's, so you want to kind of balance the act a little bit. Collaboration, though, is a good word, because that is started up approximately 5 years ago here in Michigan, because a lot of our cases were being contentious. That's the reason I was told. I'm not sure, but I believe that that's truthful. I'm also a certified mediator as well. And I used to be a firm believer that litigation was the way to go. I would litigate early on in my career. I would litigate over $1 just for the fun of it. And then I found out that I would explain to this, and I give them that example. And I say, you know what, though? Here's the thing. Your kids actually see these transcripts. Your kids are going through this. Your friends and family members are going through this. Do you really want your whole world to be out there on a transcript? Because people can pull that all the time period. And then they look at me, they're like, yeah, you're right. I said, no, I don't mind. I'm always there for a litigation. I love to litigate, but I also want to make sure too that when you come out of my office, that you come out a little bit better off. And also that if we can try to make sure that you can co-parent with the other parents, and that helps a lot with the relationship with the children too as well. Because we want the children to make sure that they look at both parents and respect both of them. So
Absolutely, yeah.
and collaboration helps too, because it saves a lot of money for individuals who don't have a lot of money. And it also saves on relationships too. So I give that approach too as well. There are sometimes too in the middle of divorces that we're past the collaboration stage. Maybe we're about ready to go to mediation. What I'll tell them is this: is if you can talk to your spouse and maybe sit at a coffee place that's public, then talk to them about what personal property they want to keep and what personal property you want to keep. And then make that list and bring that to mediation, so that's one thing we have checked off our list. So it helps with, and then they actually talk to each other a little bit. Sometimes actually they get back together. Very rare.
That's a rom-com waiting to happen right there. The coffee shop get back together. I like it. You mentioned mediation. I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. So does every case, is it a requirement to go to mediation before it goes further than that?
It depends on what the scheduling order is. Every court is different. I work in several different courts, but I try to, in my career and in our office, I try to make sure that we can go to mediation before trial, because I also want to make sure that, like I said before, it saves them money. But also, I find, and there's statistics out there, that if you agree to something that both parties agree, they will most likely follow that instead of following what a judge does. And
What they're being ordered to do,
correct. Because
right?
human beings don't like to be ordered what to do.
Totally.
And when they come together and come to this agreement, and they might have to give over here and the other person might have to give something up, they come out thinking, all right, well, it wasn't so bad. We can go through this process and we'll just get divorced. But they have to always remember this though. Once they sign that mediation agreement, and every attorney should say this, that is final and binding, and meaning that you cannot go back on that, whatever you agree to. And mediation can be very lengthy. It can be very long hours for a day. And so I try to make sure that if I see my client getting tired, I stop it and we'll go a different day, because I don't want my client agreeing to something just to get out of there.
Just to get done with the
Correct.
meeting. Yeah, that's a good point.
And a lot of times they'll say, I just want to be done. No, you don't want to just be done. And I don't say that just to get more attorney fees. I say that because I want them to have a fair and equitable resolution. And I want to make sure that they're not kicking themselves when they get out in the parking lot or the next day, because they might feel good then, but really they missed some of the points that I was trying to raise during mediation.
And a good point about mediation is that, and you said you were also a mediator for certain cases as well, but it's not the mediator's job to decide what is going to happen. You're trying to facilitate a conversation and an agreement between the two parties, whereas a judge in a in going to litigation they would give that order we were talking about.
Absolutely. And the other thing about mediation when you're facilitating, a lot of people can get their feelings out too. I mean, some of them we don't want to come out, but
Right.
because there are base rules that we use, but you can't bring in some of the evidence that you would bring in normally for court. I mean, vice versa. We can bring in as much as we want in mediation, but in court, you're limited to the hearsay rule, the evidence rules of relevance, authentication. So you can't not get as much information out to the judge. And this is a stranger. They don't know you. And
Mhm.
if the two parties can come together in mediation and work it out, it's much better for the two of them.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point too. And no, within mediation, the parties are not in the same room, correct? It's like you go back and forth between them?
That depends. Sometimes we start in the room together. It depends
Okay.
on how contested the divorce is. Obviously, we don't want domestic violence victims in a room, and sometimes we don't even allow them to mediate because we don't want them to have coercion or duress upon them. And
Mhm.
you have to make sure that that's checked out beforehand. And any mediator in the state of Michigan actually has to have a form filled out, and they give that form to the mediator so that they can look at that to make sure that we're not having any problems before mediation.
Okay. And then so following if mediation doesn't work, then you go to trial, but does any of the stuff from the mediation process get introduced in a trial?
No, so mediation
Okay.
is all private, and that's
That's a good thing, I think.
it is a very good thing.
Yeah.
And we go through all the rules about that. You can't bring up something, and you can't have the mediator be subpoenaed to come into court either as well. So no, that does not come in. You have to go and bring in all the evidence. But it does give you kind of a inkling of where the individuals are going on the other side. Like, okay, they think the inheritance, first of all, they think inheritance is all theirs. It wasn't commingled. All right, we got to show that it's commingled in court. There's a difference.
You're a lawyer, but you kind of have to be a therapist almost in these situations. How do you guide clients to emotionally navigate these challenges of divorce while also, of course, keeping legal considerations in focus?
Well, I will say this, I am not a therapist at all.
Not officially.
But we do, you're right. Attorneys wear several hats. And I
Yeah.
always tell clients, look, I am not your therapist. I want to make sure that's abundantly clear, because I can't hold your hand and do my job effectively and efficiently. And there are going to be times that it's because divorce is like going through a death. And I try
Yeah.
to explain that to them. And the longer that you've been married, the worse off it is for that individual. But I show them kind of a graph. I made it up myself. It's a circle of where they're going to be at each stage. And I said, sometimes you're going to be right there. If you think about a clock right there where it's 30 after, that's the point that where you're saying, you know what, I think I just want to get this done and over with. And I want to start working and making sure that I put my feelings aside, because my therapist is working for me. So I always try to set them up with a good therapist, because that's confidential, because of HIPAA. And it's confidential for them to have that. And I always agree with therapy, even if they say to me, I don't need therapy, Miss Lyke. Everybody could use a couple sessions of therapy, right?
I totally agree with you. I've honestly never been to it. I've never had it, but everybody always says that, like, no matter who you are, you can benefit from it.
I never have either, but I will tell you, I have many friends who are therapists, and I make sure that each person is assigned to a good therapist that kind of aligns with their thinking, or maybe how to perceive that person, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't want someone having to go through therapist after therapist, because that's not going to help them. And some people go through domestic violence victims. Some people have drug addictions as spouses. So going to therapy is a big thing for their emotions,
Yeah.
because I have to have them thinking rationally when they come here. And so if they're not getting that therapy and they're not getting that outside help, they're not going to be able to help or assist myself as their attorney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had a hard time finding a therapist because I only want one who's going to tell me that I'm right. That's all I'm looking for. Is just, you're justified, Kevin. You're justified in everything that you feel and think.
I always think that the judge should tell me that all the time. So
Yeah, right. I always side with Kristina, no matter what.
I'm waiting for that day.
For anyone who is just sort of beginning the divorce process, particularly if they're feeling maybe overwhelmed by it, what would one piece of advice be?
There's a lot of advice I give, but one thing I would say to them is this: you're going to get through this no matter what. But I can't tell you to go and get this divorce done. You have to go back home and think about everything that I provided to you, all the tools that I gave you, and think about, is this the best choice for myself and the kids? And I give them some of my advice on, how I think that they should be treated and how marriage should be. And maybe you should go to marriage counseling, things of that nature. And if marriage counseling doesn't work, because a lot of times it does not, but at least you're trying to do that, because you'll kick yourself if you didn't try that before you filed for divorce. And I think that's very wise advice to give to an individual, because marriage is very important, and you got to weed that garden a lot of times when you're having marital problems. And a lot of times people forget when they have children too that they need to go out and have a date with their spouse. Otherwise, they're forgetting and neglecting their spouse. And so that leads into divorce after 20 years of after the kids are gone, because they're having that empty nest syndrome. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's a very difficult time on the marriage in itself.
It's a good point. Yeah, it's almost like they don't know what to do without the kids there. They're not.
Exactly.
They have no idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I always tell people this: while you're thinking about everything on the plate, and whether or not you're going to do this divorce, start making copies of all the bills, make videos of all the rooms and every spot of, like, even the coin jar. Everybody has a coin jar in their house. That is one of
Mm-hmm.
the biggest things that gets taken right away, right? Or your wedding band. Make sure that you place your wedding band, because people think that, oh, I'm going to take the wedding band because she's not supposed to have that, or he's not supposed to have that. But once you say I do, here's the advice today, the legal advice. That ring is theirs. That is the
Mm-hmm.
law.
You gave it to them.
Say I
Mm-hmm.
do, that ring is theirs. And the other thing I would say too is make sure that pictures are date stamped, because you'll find that certain properties, like personal property, will be taken to an individual's house. And so if you have things date stamped and list, and where, like, what the mortgage is, and what all real property you own, and what deficits we have, liabilities, that helps, so that when they are ready to come back to me, because usually they are, they'll have their ducks in a row.
Great tips for sure. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Legal Beagle with Attorney Kristina Lyke. To connect with Kristina, head to likelaw.com, and that's Lyke. And speaking of like, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We love having you be part of our community. Kristina, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.